Struggling with Hydra? Well, we're going to cover how to build those teams and some strategies you can use to successfully get that one key every week. So stay tuned. All right, welcome in. Today we're going to be dealing with the pesky Hydra. But before we dive into team comps and the strategies that you need to know, I wanted to quickly run over the Hydra Heads and how we're going to be building comps around them. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be going through and reading their kit one by one. I'm basically just going to give the quick TLDR on each head and what we need to do to manage it. So the first one is the Head of Blight. This has a super pesky skill that it puts out where it puts a poison cloud on everyone that is annoying to deal with. You're going to want to make sure that you are bringing some kind of block buffs for dealing with this head across the battle, and that block buffs is going to be helpful in some other spots too, as we see going forward. The next one here is the Head of Torment, and the Head of Torment is super annoying because when attacked by enemies not under a perfect veil, it places a true fear debuff on them for one turn, which cannot be blocked or resisted. Now, that is super annoying to deal with. In a lot of cases, you're going to bring a champ like a Rector who's going to put up those veils for you, or a Shamael who's going to kind of eat those fear debuffs as they're coming onto each champ. So keep that in mind because the Head of Torment there can certainly be annoying to deal with if you don't bring something in for it. The other big one is the Head of Mischief, and you might hear us talking about a quote-unquote mischief tank as we go today. The big deal about a mischief tank is what you're trying to do is this mischief head is going to try to steal any of the buffs that you have on your champs. Well, it's going to try to do that to the champ that has the most buffs on them at whatever given time. So generally, your slowest champ, or the one that might be buffing themselves to have those extra buffs on it, should have high resist so that this Head of Mischief can't cause mischief and steal those buffs from your team. The other big annoying one with this head is that you can't directly attack it unless it has a Hex debuff on it. So you want to make sure you're bringing Hex into the battle. So if this head does happen to eat one of your champs, you can attack it directly and deal with it as needed. And then personally, one of my most annoying heads to deal with is the Head of Wrath. Now, the Head of Wrath is going to progressively count up as it goes. You'll see a little counter pop up in the corner over here. And essentially what it's going to do is count upwards, and it depends on which level when it goes off. But at that level, it essentially will trigger. It will counterattack and attack your whole team, as well as put up a reflect damage and an increase attack on this champ. So you want to make sure that you have block debuffs up and are running into this champ at a time when it is set up so that it's not going to immediately put that reflect damage and increase attack on itself, and you have the highest likelihood of staying alive. Now, there are two more heads that you don't see in the beginning rotation. The first is the Head of Decay. This one is the main reason for bringing Provoke to your teams. The big reason is that the Head of Decay has two skills, one of which will remove all debuffs and then increase turn meters. And then the second one, it will remove debuffs from the lowest HP Hydra head and then give it a life barrier, which is very, very hard to knock through. Essentially, it's a big shield. So that is one of them. The next one here is the Head of Suffering. And as Sauce likes to say, this head is basically the big deal on this one is that it likes to double turn, in that it places a debuff for 3 turns, then grants this head an extra turn. Now that extra turn is counted against your number of turns with an eaten champ. So if this Head of Suffering eats your champ, oftentimes you'll have one less turn to get that champ back than you think. So you might want to prioritize either killing this head or dealing with this head and making sure those debuffs are up so that if it does eat, you can get your champ back. Next up, we're going to pick the best champs and design the team comps that'll be successful in Hydra. Now, luckily, we have an account that we're using from Whiskey Red tonight that has a pretty decent selection of champs for us to get started with. So we have his account pulled up here from some screenshots. I also have the legendary Sasquatch with me tonight. So we're both going to be on the mic and figuring out some teams and figuring out some comps. What we normally do to start out is similar to what we do for a tag team, which if you haven't seen that, check out the tag team video that we have on the channel here as well. And we will start pulling out all of the damage champs, support champs, and revive champs. And then after that, we'll build them into a team. So as usual, we will fast forward through this part of the brainstorming and all that fun part. Okay, now that we have all of the champions lined out, we're going to figure out how to place some of these on the teams and what sort of comps are going to go well together. One of the things Sauce and I, particularly Sauce, loves to do first is find the provokes that we have on the team, as well as some of the block buffs, the hex, the things like that that we need for the specific heads. So we'll start outlining some of the champs that are provoke champs, and then kind of move on from there to start building the teams. So we have taken some time and brainstormed teams. This takes us a while, as you see, figuring out what skills go together, what are the best comps. Oftentimes, it's great to have someone to do this with. I'm lucky in that I have the awesome Sasquatch here. If you guys want to come by stream, you can see us kind of do this together, but we get to talk through teams. And I'm going to have Sasquatch talk through the teams that we set up for Whiskey Red, what each character kind of brings to the table, and why they fit into the comp well. So, yeah, I'll let you take over, Sauce.
All right. So the way I typically set up my teams is I like to start with breaking it down to who's going to be doing like speed leads, especially, and then mischief tanks and block buffs, because those are typically like the biggest things you're going to need. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying the teams that we set up are typically just good teams. These are not chase champion teams. These are not going to get you 5 billion points in champion chase. These are just designed to try to maximize every space of Hydra to get the one key that you're looking for, or to be able to progress in Hydra. So these are just basic progression teams. They're nothing that's going to be out of the ordinary. They're not your double Trunda, double Yumiko, niche, super. You need to build these in a very specific way with speed tuning in order to get the most out of them. These are just overall good teams that try to cover the basics of Hydra. So in the first team that we did, we set up Necmo as the lead. Necmo brings a speed lead. He also brings AoE on one is A2. Which brings decreased attack, which is absolutely 100% needed, especially going against a Wrath. He brings decreased speed and an AoE leech on his A2. He does bring a increased speed for your whole champ, as well as a turn meter fill on his A3. It also grants him an extra turn. That can be beneficial to you. It can also be detrimental to you. It just kind of depends on how it plays out, especially when you start burning through buffs because of the extra turn. But he does have a passive too that fills his turn meter by 5% each time a debuff on an enemy is removed, transpires, or expires. You're going to be putting out a lot of debuffs. This helps him push even further with not as much speed. Now, you do want Necmo fast, but his passive does help with that, and obviously having increased speed and decreased speed kind of helps cover that gap. Coronar. For this team, we went ahead and picked up Coronar for our Provoker. He's also going to be the Mischief tank. Coronar does a couple of things really well. Again, he brings decreased attack, which is great. but he also brings a decreased defense as long as they have a decreased attack. Nekmo's drop and decreased attack. So is Coronar, so he will almost always be able to place that decreased defense. Coronar has a passive that counterattacks as long as he gets hit by someone who's under decreased attack, decreased defense, or decreased speed. Between him and Nekmo, everybody should almost always be under those buffs. So Coronar is going to be counterattacking a lot. If you can get Coronar into a Hex set, Coronar is going to be consistently placing Hex across the entire board and being able to keep it up consistently. With something like War Master on, he's going to do a substantial amount of damage himself without having to build him to do too much damage. When his A2, he does bring a block debuffs and an increased defense for himself, which means that as long as you're not placing those debuffs on your other champions, you can use him as your mischief tank, which in this team we will be. From there, Nut really needs no introduction. He has a triple hitter enemy max HP, so he's going to be our primary damage on the team. He does have a counterattack, though, on his A2. To play it safe, the best thing to do, especially if you're going to run this on auto at all, is to shut his A2 off. Unless you know what you're doing and can work around it, I do highly recommend shutting his A2 off. The weaken is not that big of a deal. It's not enough to want to risk having counterattack on the Hydra. Sulfurion is a new addition to the game. He is an amazing champion that he has an A1, which will increase his own turn meter and allies turn meter as well, as long as the person he attacks is under HP burn. His A2 drops an HP or places HP burn, which is nice for Poison Cloud, instantly activates it on all enemies for 3 turns, instantly activates it, then places a shield on the allies. He does a revive as well with an extra turn, heals even more with his passive for HP burns. He's a really amazing champion. Moving on to Husk. Husk has 2 primary things. Husk has an enemy max HP A2, and he has Provoke on an A1. Husk in a Relentless set is really good, especially if you need backup Provoke. In this team, probably won't need it as much, but it is nice to have because you can put Nekmo or Coronar in a Provoke set or one or the other in a Hex set, so you don't necessarily need to rely on Husk's backup Provoke as much, but his A2 enemy max HP hit is substantial. The one thing to watch with Husk is Affinity. He has Force, so that can have some issues with some of the rotations, but typically he does really well. You want to shut Husk's A3 off. It is completely useless. Moving on to Ugo. Ugo needs no introduction. She is the Hydra Queen. She always is, always will be. She brings up block buffs on a 3-turn cooldown, along with an AoE decreased defense, which is phenomenal. This plays back into Coronar's passive as well. She does remove all heal reduction debuffs, an additional debuff as well, which is usually nice in case you do end up catching a fear, which this team is going to because it doesn't have anything to really combat Torment. We're aware of this. You just kind of burn through it, especially when you have Nut and Husk hitting enemy max HP, burning through Torment. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. It does bring a revive, but it's so conditional it might as well not exist, so nobody uses her for that. A1 brings a single target leech. So she covers that and makes sure that they hopefully don't get any buffs on them.
For the sake of time, we are not going to cover the other 2 teams on this video, as that would add another 10 or 15 minutes to it. But if you have questions about any of those champs or other champs for Hydra, feel free to stop by twitch.tv/Arcamelli and check out the stream. We're always making Hydra teams, tag teams, all sorts of fun teams inside a raid, so stop by and check it out. But before we go, we want to leave you with a couple closing thoughts and strategies on running Hydra with these teams that you've set up. All right. Any closing thoughts, Sauce?
There's a lot of little nuances to Hydra I don't think you really need to get into in one video.
Yep. I would agree. Hydra is a very nuanced and, like TK made a point in chat, Poison Cloud gives weak hits unless HP burn lands. There's all sorts of different, like, small little nuanced small mechanics in the game that you learn as you go with Hydra. But having the big pieces that we talked about, so having decreased defense, having weaken, having HP burn, having block buffs up, having somebody that is either cleansing or dealing with that mischief tank, having some of those shields. Like we talked about, the structure of the teams make a big difference, and then you can kind of learn as you go One last piece of advice I'll give that I try to keep in mind as I'm working through my Hydra keys. Roughly, you'll notice you get a turn count on when the champ is going to get eaten. What I would suggest is, depending on how fast your champs are running, you want to gauge out, making sure that they have their large hitting attacks up to be able to get that champ back. So, in many cases, that might mean having to delay and stagger that. For a lot of champs, I've been told that one of the best rotations is about when they hit 7 turns here. Champs are built at sort of a normal speed, 190, 200-ish in Hydra. They're going to need roughly 7 turns. If they're faster than that, they're going to need a little bit less. If they're slower than that, they might need a tiny bit more. But just kind of keep that in mind as like a rule of thumb on how you go after and hold your champ's attacks to be able to, make sure that you get it up at the right time. And the last piece of advice I would say about Hydra is that there is definitely RNG involved, and have some patience with it. Autoing it is certainly feels easier to do, but honestly, once you take a little bit of time and learn how these heads work, it's a lot more fun than it seems, and you get better damage by manualing keys than you do on autoing. So, if you're willing to have some patience and deal with some RNG, then I think it's worth it. So, hope you have some fun. Leave comments, thoughts, questions, anything like that below. If you want to see us actually brainstorm some teams and do things like that, feel free to stop by twitch.tv/Arcamelli when we are live. All right. Any closing thoughts, Sauce?
Suffering still an app.
And I think that about does it. All right. Have a good one, everybody.